Okay, well, welcome everybody to today's special event as part of the Liverpool Arab Arts Festival. My name's Rob Page. We're here for the launch of a very special book, the Book of Ramallah, which is part of Comma's Reading the City series. It features 10 stories, specially translated for the first time from Arabic into English, and it is edited by Maya Abu Al-Hayat. The way we're going to structure today's event is I'm going to introduce all three speakers, and we also have a translator, one of the translators, Mohammed Galini, and then I'm going to talk briefly, or get Maya to talk very briefly about the book in general, and then we're going to have three very short readings and then a little discussion afterwards. Just to introduce today's fantastic speakers, we have a glittering panoply of Palestinian talent today. Amir Hamid is a poet, short story writer and translator. He's been published in a number of magazines and websites, including Beirut Literature Magazine and the New Arab. He was born in Jerusalem in 1992, graduated from Beirut University, and is currently working on his first collection of short stories. We have the wonderful Ibrahim Nasrallah here as well. He was born in 1954 to Palestinian parents who had been evicted from their land in Palestine in 1948. He spent his childhood and youth in a refugee camp in Jordan and began his teaching career in Saudi Arabia. After returning to Oman, he worked in the media and cultural sector until 2006. Before moving entirely into writing. Today, he has published 15 collections of poetry, 21 novels, and several other books. His work has been translated into English, Italian, Danish, Turkish, and Persian. 3 of his novels have been shortlisted or longlisted for the International Prize for Arab Fiction, IPAF, sometimes referred to as the Arab Booker. And in 2018, his novel, The Second Dog War, won the Arab Booker. We also have the wonderful Maya Abu Hayat, who is not only a contributor to the book, but also an editor. And if anybody's ever done any work with literature in the West Bank or Palestine, all literary roads lead to Maya. She is a novelist, a poet, a children's writer. She's published 2 books of poetry and 3 novels. Her book, Fil Bayt Al Ghul, is one of my daughter's favourites, and her novel, her first novel, was called No One Knows His Blood Type. She's also the director of the Palestine Writing Workshop, an institution that seeks to encourage reading in Palestinian communities through creative writing projects and storytelling with children and teachers. She is also a contributor to A Bird Is Not a Stone, an anthology of contemporary Palestinian poetry. We're also very lucky today to have Mohammed Galini, who is a translator and has worked on a number of previous Comma anthologies, including Palestine Plus 100, the Book of Cartoon, and of course this one. Mohammed translated Ibrahim's story and also Maya's introduction. And he's going to be reading Ibrahim's story, a passage from Ibrahim's story. So, introductions out of the way. Maya, I thought I'd just start by asking you to describe talk a little bit about this book, introduce this book, and I guess very generally introduce us to the kind of Ramallah scene, the writing scene in Ramallah, and what Ramallah means to you.
Yeah. First of all, hi to all. Thank you very much for this evening. Thank you, Ra, for all the hard job that you had done until now. Actually, at the beginning, it was very hard for me a little bit to be the editor of the Book of Ramallah, because I'm not from Ramallah. I'm originally from too many places, but I love Ramallah. I work in Ramallah. I had my life in Ramallah, but I'm not from Ramallah. I don't live in Ramallah. I live in Jerusalem. So I always need to cross too many lines in order to reach Ramallah. First, when I was in Nablus, or now when I was in Jerusalem, or even when I was living in Tunis and Jordan. So Ramallah is a faraway city for me, but at the same time, it is my city because I work there. I had all my friends, relationships, my life, my real life, like the place that I want to reach is always like Ramallah. So when I had the chance to be the editor of the Book of the Ramallah, I was like, I can maybe finally express this in a book, because it's not just my life. It's also the relationship of too many writers with Ramallah, because Ramallah is a very young city. It's not like Nablus or Jerusalem that have this history. It is a city that become a city after Oslo, like become a real city. It's like having all the harmonies and the differences and the layers that make the cities what they are. So it's like experimental cities for me, as maybe for Ibrahim it's something else, or for other writers. But for me, it was like a cities that was building or form with me in Palestine after Oslo. So finding the stories that talking about Ramallah, it was really hard. Actually, it was really hard because most of the writers that I know who live also in Ramallah, who is not from Ramallah. Most of them are even from maybe from Nablus or Tamoon, or camps like Al-Am'ari camps, or like Ibrahim Nasrallah, he lives in Jordan, or like me and Ahmad, who lives in Jerusalem. But we all have these relationships with Ramallah. Few of us are real from Ramallah, and it's hard. It's very hard to find a person who's from Ramallah, because there is no such things. There's people who live and known and have these experiments with Ramallah, but there's no Ramallah. Like maybe somebody will now be very like arguing with me in this sentence. So it was hard at the beginning. It was hard to find the stories. It's also hard because what is the definition of the city? Ramallah is like having where is Ramallah in Ramallah? It's formed from too many camps. It has like there's Al-Bire, which is like overlapping with the Ramallah, and there's like this is this dynamic which also make the city what it is. So it was hard, and at the same time it was really experiment. Like this city. So finding these 10 stories was let's say not an easy job to do, actually.
You did a fantastic job.
But at the end, yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, at the end we have these stories which is like represent, I think, represent Ramallah as it is. We have most of the stories that happened on roads, actually, and it was very fascinating actually notes for me, because it's always the way to Ramallah. And I remember this accident that happened to me when I first time came to Ramallah. I was just finished my first manuscripts for my first novel, and I was coming to Ramallah, and we were in the road, and the soldiers stopping us. It was at the first Intifada, and I thought it is the destiny. I was going to give my manuscript to the publishing house at Ramallah, and they stopped the car and they took me. me, and they said that I was wanted or something, and so I handled the manuscript to one of the passengers and give him the number of the phone number for Murad Sudani, who was the manager of the publishing house. And I asked him to give this manuscript to him, and I thought, that is my destiny. I want to read. I want to give this manuscript to Ramallah before I go to jail. And then they let me go, and they said that you have to go to Nablus, not going to Ramallah. And I was really want to go to Ramallah at that time. And it's always like obstacles to reach the city for me. And I had always like to cross Kalandia, I had to cross the checkpoint, I had to cross Albire in order to reach the center of Ramallah. And this is different from the people who live in Ramallah. They don't have to see the edges of Ramallah. So seeing the edges all the time, seeing the layers that make the city what it is, make me always look to Ramallah in a totally different angle.
Fantastic, thank you. I think this also brings us on to the readings, really, and we'll get back to unpicking what you've been talking about. But two of the three readings today are about exactly that: the difficulties of getting into Ramallah, traveling to Ramallah. So I thought now I'd ask Mohammed to read his extract from Ibrahim's story, which is called "Love in Ramallah."
Thank you. The bus to Ramallah had to stop at an Israeli checkpoint between two hills, a place called Uyun al-Haramiyya. There had never been a day when soldiers hadn't been stationed at this spot. First it was the British soldiers, after them the Jordanian soldiers, and now here we have the Israeli soldiers. Yassin knew all of this. One day we'll have a checkpoint here, Naim said. Can you see how grand our ambitions are now? Yassin retorted. They ordered the passengers off the bus. Then a soldier boarded it and walked the length of the aisle until he reached the long back seat. Then from inside, he looked back out at the faces of the passengers lined up on the tarmac, looking for any expression other than indifference. The soldier got off the bus and circled around the passengers, stopping behind an attractive young girl to stare at her. He walked a few steps, then stopping again, turning, he signaled to three other soldiers, observing the scene from 15 meters away, to come closer. As they approached, he walked to the end of the line of passengers and stopped by Yassin and Naim, signaling to Naim to step forward. Naim knew all about checkpoints. He knew every one of them. From his earliest days, they had been in his face, waiting for him. From experience, he knew that at this time of day, the soldiers liked to toy with the passengers for their own entertainment, to treat them as their playthings. The heat at 4:30 in the afternoon was enough to ignite the air between the two hills. Yassin took a look at the line of cars piling behind the bus. A person needed no superpowers to hear the silent curses emanating from their eyes, the body language that betrayed a frustration with everything around them. Come, the soldier barked at Naim, who hadn't moved. The soldier stopped directly in front of the attractive young girl, and there behind him now stood Naim. The soldier turned, looked at Naim, then looked back to the young girl. Do you want the bus to pass? He asked Naim. Naim nodded in affirmation. If you want the bus to pass, you have to kiss her, the soldier said, pointing at the girl. A glimmer lit up the soldier's eyes. They liked this game. It enthused them. The passengers, by contrast, looked at one another bemused. As for the young girl, the whole thing was like a shock to her. A car horn behind the bus broke the silence for a moment. Who's that khmar beeping? Yelled the game master. Heading back towards the car, the driver tried in vain to convince him that the horn had gone off by accident. But the soldier insisted that the car leave the long queue, turn around, and go back to where it came, Nablus. If you want to sleep the night here, then stay, or you can go back to Nablus, but there is no Ramallah for you today. Understood? A few minutes later, the car and its passengers were heading away from the checkpoint, back to the other checkpoint they had just left behind. The three kids looking out of the back window, trying to figure out what had just happened. The game master turned back to Naim and said, "Do you think it's over? It's up to you. You Palestinians are always talking about making independent decisions. Well, if you want the bus to pass and for the cars behind it to pass, then do as I say." The young girl poked her head above the surface. Until this point, she'd been submerged in a lake of shame. With eyes pregnant with tears, she looked at Naim, who looked as if he were in an even bigger lake of his own. Admittedly, for all his knowledge of checkpoints, he'd never contemplated a scenario like this. He looked to his friend Yassine, finding him lost as if in a daze. Just before Naim turned back to face the soldier, Yassine locked eyes with him for a moment. Then the soldier pressed him. "Have you decided?" "I won't do what you ask." "I told you, you're free, Habibi. Don't kiss if you don't want to kiss." Then, as he walked away, he added, "Don't move from where you are. Stay put." In front of the checkpoint, the soldiers were giggling to themselves, rummaging for change in their pockets and passing it around. They began placing bets on whether he would kiss her or not. "He will kiss her," the game master said as he pulled some cash from his pocket and flung it on the sandbags. The sun was beginning to set, and the passengers felt like they were suspended in time. The soldier approached Naim again and asked, "Haven't you decided yet?" "I won't do as you ask." And so the rifle butt struck his thigh. Everyone heard the thud on his femur before he fell to the ground, only for the soldier's jackboot to follow up, landing in his stomach. "We're busy here, I told you. If you kiss her, you all pass. If you not, you sleep here." "I won't do as you ask." The soldiers protested this foul play by the game master. His use of violence would change the outcome of the bet, but he was deaf to their complaints. Another blow came. Naim tried to dodge it, but there was no escape. Blood spurted from his forehead. The soldier walked away. Things felt like they were about to explode. The lined-up passengers were getting restless as they watched the scene without being able to move. Passengers from several of the cars and buses had disembarked on either side of the road. Now the guns turned to them. The soldiers ordered them back to their cars. In a turn that nobody saw coming, the young girl bent down by the man on the ground in front of her, took his hand and whispered, "Kiss me, I beg you." Naim looked up at the passengers again. They were staring at the ground, trying not to be there. He kissed her on the right cheek. As his lips met her face, several of the soldiers whooped, as if they were cheering for a winning goal by their team, while others grumbled in disapproval.
Thank you, Mohammed. I thought now we would ask Amir to read his section from his story. So we're going from a checkpoint to the north of Ramallah to a checkpoint to the south, which is Kalandia checkpoint. Amir?
Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you, Ra.
Thank you.
Okay. My mother gave birth to me at Hourani checkpoint. Her family were from Nablus, and she was visiting them while she was 9 months pregnant. My father, who was from Jerusalem, had long warned her about leaving the house at such a delicate stage. He hated her family as much as he hated occupation. They had put him through hell before eventually allowing him to marry my mother. People from Jerusalem don't have the best reputations among those in the West Bank, you see. When he heard that she was going into labor at the checkpoint, he came running out into the street in his underwear. Yes, my father ran all the way from Jerusalem to Nablus, which only worsened the already bad reputation of his townsfolk. If I had not uttered my first word, Mahsoum, then and there, he probably would have divorced her. He was so angry with her for disobeying him. From that day, my father thought of me as a blessed child and called me Salah ad-Din, after the great scourge of the Crusaders. My primary school was on the left side of what would later be the separation wall in the town of Aram. I had to cross the old neighborhood checkpoint on my way to it twice a day. My secondary school was on the right side of this line, where the wall would eventually be built when I was in 7th grade. Even before then, I had to cross checkpoint after checkpoint as if the line were following me, bending round to meet me again wherever I went. Having graduated from secondary school with flying colors, I enrolled at Beirut University, even though Harvard begged me to join them. I had refused, you see. How could Salah ad-Din agree to immigrate to the land of colonizers? I used to cross the checkpoint daily. I mean, the calendar checkpoint. What you may not know is that when you cross, the soldier taps your ID number into his keyboard. The computer uses what they call in programming language a counter function, which only accepts one type of variable, integers. The computer counts you on its fingers, and when the number reaches a certain value, the soldier picks up his phone and receives orders to let you into the red room. The red room is a small, narrow cell. The old checkpoint. In the old checkpoint, you would sit there on a chair, resting comfortably for a couple of hours. But in the new one, they leave you standing there in the dark with only a spider in the wall to keep you company. You stand there like that. You stand there like that for a few hours. Then they let you go. But the computer doesn't forget. The camel, that is the technology, never forgets. And from then on, every time you go through, they take you to the red room and keep you waiting again until they eventually feel sorry for you and give you a paper of an interview with intelligence. As your waiting goes on, you may yell at them, "For heaven's sake, just let me meet the captain. I want to become an informant." But it doesn't help.
Thank you, Amir. Thank you very much. And finally, we're going to have a short reading from Maya's story, which is not about checkpoints and not about the roads. Maya, could you read a short passage from the story called Badia's Magic Water?
Badia has finished with the first body, an easy task, everything prepared ahead of time and supervised by the wives of the dead woman's 2 sons. They stand, the wives, outside the autopsy room as Badia pours water on the plump body, reciting prayers. Nothing crueler than a mother without daughters. She thinks a mother without daughters has no one to mourn her. One of the women had tucked $50 into her palm before she began, and this makes her work with all her heart. She places a clean towel between the legs, then pulls the right side of the body towards her and cleans it. Then the left. Then comes the full ablution and the wrapping of the head, then the whole body in clean white clothes. She does not make the same effort with the second woman, who will likely be given a fresh shroud in Nablus by the woman of her family. Badia takes a break to smoke a cigarette. Its taste unlike the one she smoked this morning. It is a waiting cigarette. It's a waiting cigarette, smoked in the hope that Samah will come back. But Samah takes her time, and Badia is out of excuses to keep her from starting on the 3rd crops. Young bodies fill her with dread. Not that she has seen many in her time at the hospital. Most of her young clients are girls, killed in stories of love and suspicion. Only 2 died of natural causes. The rest of the day, she knows, will be shadowed with gloom. The workers place the body on a large slab in the middle of the room, covered with a blue hospital sheet. 3 days in a fridge are enough to harden the softest body on earth. Badi'a is suddenly aware of a line of light from the window parting the darkness. The dust hanging in the room's air becomes visible. The voices of street vendors mixed with the sounds of children on their lunch break at the nearby Kadura Camp Girls' School filter down to the hospital basement. Badi'a lifts the sheet of the girl's face, revealing thick, wavy red hair, which snakes down half her body. The breasts hanging limply to the sides stop Badi'a, who understands at once that a baby's mouth has clamped itself around these teats. Traces of redness and inflammation are still visible. The skin around the uterus and navel show that she had given birth not long before. Badi'a touches the skin and steps back. How could a body refrigerated for 3 days still be so warm and soft? She rushes to the girl's file and reads, 29 years old, nurse, traces of poison in the body. They killed her, she thought. The thought leaps to Badi'a's mind. They killed her. She clutches at her heart for a moment. She remembers it all, as if it had just happened. Just 17 when she met Osama, who trotted past her house in Al-Bire on a white horse clad in black. She loved him straight away and began to wait for him to leave the nearby mosque after evening prayer. The longer she waited for him to pass, the more she loved him, until the day she met him in a clothes shop in the Ramallah souk. Only in that period did she come to understand the difference between Ramallah and Al-Bire. The overlapping cities were divided by an imaginary line existing nowhere but in the heads of their residents, but which became clear to her when Ramallah was chosen as their meeting place, far from eyes of her mother's large family in Al-Bire.
Thank you, Maya. It's a very big jump from the two previous stories to this one in terms of subject matter. I thought we'd rewind a little bit and we'll pick up some of the different threads of the different stories. I thought I'd ask first with Mohammed to help. We could ask Ibrahim to tell us a little about his relationship with Ramallah. He's based in Ibrahim. You're based in Jordan. Which is a very short distance as the crow flies, as we say in English. In terms of its actual distance, it should take less than an hour to get from Amman to Ramallah. But in reality, obviously, it's impossible for lots of people. It's impossible for people from Gaza to enter Jordan, to enter Palestine from Amman. And for those people who are lucky enough to get through, there's obviously it takes hours and hours going through many different checkpoints. So, given that you've grown up outside of Ramallah, Ibrahim, how are you able to write about it, and what does Ramallah mean to you? Ibrahim, are you there? Have we lost Ibrahim?
Ibrahim's on mute. Ibrahim.
ثانك يو. يعني أنا بعتقد إنه العلاقة مع رام الله بالنسبة لي هي كالعلاقة مع بقية المدن الفلسطينية، لأنني لا أستطيع أن أصل أي مدينة من هذه المدن، وربما هذه كانت القضية الكبيرة في كل ما كتبت حتى الآن عن فلسطين.
So I think that my relationship to Ramallah is similar to my relationship to many of the other Palestinian cities that I just can't reach, and so that has been like the subject matter of many of my writings about Palestine lately.
لكن في الوقت نفسه أنا بعتقد إنه علاقتي مع رام الله هي أيضا علاقة كل فلسطيني في داخل فلسطين مع رام الله، لأنه ليس بالسهولة أن يصل إليها.
But also my relationship to Ramallah is very similar to the relationship of every Palestinian inside Palestine to Ramallah, because it's difficult for them also to reach Ramallah.
عرفت رام الله على مراحل متعددة. يعني كانت الزيارة الأولى إلي لرام الله عام 84 ثم 87، ثم عدت إليها بعد 22 سنة عام 2009.
I got to know Ramallah at over several stages. My first visit there was in 1984, then 1987, and then I went back to Ramallah 22 years later in 2009. شكرا.
وفي كل مرة كانت رام الله تكون مدينة مختلفة تماما.
And every time in each of those visits, Ramallah would be seen as a totally different city.
رام الله 2000 رام الله ال 84 وال 87 كتبت عنها كتابي الأمواج البرية الذي سبق الانتفاضة الفلسطينية الأولى.
The Ramallah that I saw in 1984 and 1987 was the subject of my book, Land Waves, or Waves of Land, about the period before the first Intifada.
لكن هذا الكتاب كان مختلف تماما عن الكتاب الثاني الذي كتبته عن رام الله عام 2004، وهو تحت شمس الضحى، والذي يضم القصص التي ظهرت في كتاب رام الله.
But then the book that I wrote in 2004. And the book I wrote in 2004 was very different to this book, to the other books. That book was titled Under the Early Morning Sun and had a different collection of stories.
يعني نحن نتحدث عن مدينة متحولة بسرعة. صحيح أنها تتكون من مجموعة من المدن والقرى التي حولها، لكنها الآن أصبحت تتكون من مجموع المدن العربية التي عاش فيها الفلسطينيين ثم عادوا إلى رام الله حاملين هذه المدن.
We are talking about a city that's transforming very fast. Of course, physically it consists of all the towns and villages around it, but also Ramallah is made up of all the cities that its residents who have returned to Ramallah have lived in around the world in their diaspora.
ولذلك الكتاب الذي كان يمكن أن نكتبه عن رام الله في الثمانينات أو التسعينيات أو حتى في بداية الألفية، إذا ما كتبنا كتابا الآن سيكون كتابا مختلفا تماما.
And so, like books we wrote about the Ramallah in the 80s or the 90s or the noughties would be very different to a book written about Ramallah today.
يعني لم تكن رام الله بالنسبة لي صعبة جدا لأن أكتب عنها، لأنه يعني كتبت عن مراحل ومدن فلسطينية كما مثل عكا وحيفا، رواية تدور مثلا في القرن الثامن عشر.
So I'd say it wasn't too difficult for me to write about Ramallah, as I'd covered other Palestinian cities like Haifa and Akka. For example, in a novel that was set in the 18th century.
يعني لقد كتب علي أن أكتب عن هذا الغائب المفتقد الذي أحن إليه، وربما تكون جملة لأحد الأصدقاء الكتاب الفلسطينيين تلخص هذا الوضع وتقول أنه كل إنسان يعيش في وطنه، لكن وطن الفلسطيني يعيش فيه.
So it seems it was ordained for me to write about that which is missing, and I'd like to quote another writer colleague that says, the city of each person, people live in their own cities, but the city of Palestinians lives within them.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I just wanted to ask a question really about your story, Ibrahim. The section that we heard, that kind of humiliation of ordinary Palestinian citizens trying to travel from one place to another. It feels very, very common from my own experience of briefly being in the West Bank. Was that particular incident based on or inspired by a real life incident, or is it just a kind of summary of many others?
يعني أنا بعتقد هذه القصة أو القصص الثانية أو كل ما نكتبه هو عمليا مجموعة من الخبرات والحكايات وما نسمعه وما نعيشه وما نقرأ عنه.
I could say that this story and all the other stories are a collection of experiences, stories that we've heard from others, and what we hear about, and so on.
ولذلك حتى لو كانت هذه أي قصة نسمعها هي حقيقية، أنا بعتقد القصة الحقيقية أشبه ما تكون بالألوان التي بين أيدي الرسام، ليست هي اللوحة التي يرسمها في النهاية.
So even if this story in itself is true, but what I'd say is that the real story is the paints and the colors that a painter holds, expressing what we are living.
لأن القصة بعتقد هي أسلوبنا، وهي الأهم من هذا هي رؤيتنا لأي حدث نعيشه أو نسمعه أو نقرأ عنه.
The real story is how we deal with things and how we approach the situation that we're in and what's going on.
ولذلك القصة الحقيقية أنا بعتقد في الأدب هي القصة التي نصدقها وقد تكون ونتأثر بها، وقد تكون هناك كثير من القصص الواقعية فعلا، لكنها حينما تكتب لا تستطيع أن تمس قلوبنا وتؤثر فينا.
So in literature, I feel that the real story is the story that is believable and that leaves an effect on us, because you can write a story that has happened, but if it doesn't leave an effect on you, then it doesn't work.
تؤثر فينا.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just to move on to Amir, I'm interested to know kind of your relationship with the city. It's a strange project to kind of come up with when to ask writers or to collect writing about a city when half the writers find it very difficult to even get to that city in question, as Maya was saying. Your story is about a very cocky, very confident young man who's full of bravura and isn't really doesn't seem to be intimidated by any of this crap that they get at the border. Pardon my French. Is that a common attitude amongst the young Palestinians, just to defy this humiliation and to treat it with humor? Is that what you wanted to do with the story?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is one of the the ways of looking at the story. Yeah. To use the sarcasm and use imagination as a way to fight, but I think also we can see behind this sarcasm and imagination we can also see there's weakness, there's also sadness, there's sometimes you can feel that there's no hope, So I think sarcasm can be a weapon to fight back. And if I want to talk about this story more, I think also that the situation itself, especially in the checkpoint of Ramallah, of Qania, just the situation itself is also so surreal. when you look at it, like especially when you actually when like the two times, the past and the present, like being mixed together. Because when you like, okay, waiting in the checkpoint, and sometimes you feel that you are waiting in an airport, that you are crossing like borders, you know, between two countries, not one place. And you remember that the land which is next to the checkpoint used to be an airport. It used to be an airport called Jerusalem Airport, and people used to, you know, go and to Amman, go to Beirut, and right now everything is changed. The place itself it becomes like something that, let's say, cut or block the normal flow of space between two cities, and you are there in the middle of let's say the checkpoint, and you are in the middle between, let's say, two capitals. One of them is the desired capital of the Palestinian state, which is the East Jerusalem, and also you feel that there is another city that you are trying to go to, which is Ramallah, which is actually the actual city, the actual capital of Palestine. Maybe the city pretends to be a capital, but actually it's the actual capital that contains all, you know, the capital, the like institutions, the government buildings, and all of that, and all the support is there. And in a way, you feel this, let's say, really surreal situation, and this complexity, and also I think. So yeah, this is one of the reasons I think why I chose to write about this situation in a sarcastic way, because it's in a way it reflects the actual, let's say, situation of the waiting itself, and also you know. One of the things that this story are actually trying to explore is not only the let's say waste or the blocking of the space itself, also the wasting of time. Like you are there and waiting and waiting and waiting, and this is, if you count it, maybe you will maybe this time that is actually like wasted is many years of our life. So there, and you are exhausted, and the energy is going away. So this, all of that, and your body in the place, all of that actually can create like sometimes this weird situation where you can think sometimes you are Salahuddin, and you also you feel that you want to talk about, let's say, your pain in direct way, let's say. So yeah, I think as you said, yeah, of course, sarcasm can be a weapon, and maybe the new, like, maybe generation is like using maybe sarcasm more, you know, because as I said, you know, the fact that the reality itself is really sarcastic, you know.
Yeah, and I think there's something positive and there's something energizing to hear the sarcasm, to hear the humor and the defiance. Although the situation is terrible, for me it's an optimistic thing to read. It's a positive thing to read. Just moving on to you, Maya. You talk in your introduction about how Ramallah and al-Birri, both being two cities being sort of kind of pushed together, means that you've got two different kind of worlds almost. Ramallah is since the Oslo Accords it's obviously has had the parliamentary buildings, it had the institutions of government, lots and lots of NGOs, lots of Westerners and non-Palestinians working there, which gives the city a different flavour. It's much more relaxed, and it's less conservative than maybe other Palestinian cities. and one of those is Al-Birri, which is right beside it. So you have this, and there's no kind of border between those two districts, between what's technically the city of Ramallah and what's technically the city of Al-Birri. So you get this clash of lifestyles and cultures, and you have this very, very conservative world kind of right next door to a much more laid back kind of city, which has, you know, cafes and bars and much more kind of relaxed kind of lifestyle. And in your story, you've gone to, you've looked at a much darker, more negative side of Palestinian life and that conservative life, I guess. Why did you choose to shine a light on the subject of honor killings, and because it's such a difficult subject for to tackle?
Yeah, يعني I think it's a city. Yani, if we are talking about the city, you have everything. When I look to the stories, like most of the stories are happening, like I say, at the road with checkpoints, and I wanted also to give the feelings of what is happening inside, like not just from the outside, like, because all my writing is always focusing on these two things from what is happening, the relationship inside the characters, inside the incubation, let's say, and the relationships with the incubation. So we always have these two sometimes vertical lines that we as a writer, we need to talk about, we need to express, we need to deal with in a ways. And also Ramallah give you this feeling of isolation, and like you have it, and you need this freedom as a writer to be sometimes isolated and feel this crazy feelings of being free, and you can write everything, you can do everything, you can express everything, but at the same time there's a very, very, very thin line between being exposed and being isolated, and it's always you are always at the edge of things. So and this is what we write, yani it's and this is what I wanted to show in these stories, because you know that you always have this previous expectation of what Palestinian writers would write about, and I wanted this collection to have all this flavors of things that is happening. And Badi'a's stories is about the myth and magical things also. It's not just about killing, it's about like how women try to live their own lives and make myths around it, and they survive sometimes, like Badi'a. So it's you as a woman, or in this kind of city that gives you the isolation, the freedom, also the killing sometimes. So it's all these layers of living in this kind of conservative cities, and at the same time that give you the freedom to be alone and love and do whatever you want. So we have this not just in Badi'a's story, we also have it in Ahlam Sharat's story about the horse, which is I think one of the like fascinating story for me, because it's give you like a new layer of Ramallah, the employees that come and live alone in Ramallah city from village, from their own cities, and at the same time they are living their own isolation, totally isolation, that makes you you think that you will find love, you find yourself, but at the same time that's not happening. It's you alone, having your own fears and needs, and maybe one day you will really love a horse and marry him. So in this story you have all this different flavor of stories, and they are all true in a way. They are all all what we live and what we imagine and what we dreamed of and what we maybe sometimes will live in the future, live our future and our past. Also, there's a story about, with Mahmoud Shqair's story, which talk about a very important period, which is before, I think it was the period in the 16s, that you had to see Ramallah before all the Intifada and Oslo. You see Ramallah from totally different angle also.
Thank you. You mentioned Aslam Shawat's story, which is about a kind of magic realism story in which a woman is isolated, as you say, and falls in love with a horse and marries a horse, which she looks at every day in the field behind her flat. And it's a story about isolation, but it's actually a story about the pandemic. It's written during the pandemic. Yeah. And I guess that brings me on to how writers are surviving during the pandemic in Palestine. You wrote, Maya, in The Guardian a couple of weeks ago about the fact that vaccines aren't being released to Palestinians. Israel has one of the best vaccination kind of campaigns within its own people, within its own country, but right next door or within its own occupation, under its own occupation, it's not allowing, with the exception of I think 5,000 vaccines, it's not allowing Palestinians to be vaccinated. So how are people coping? I mean, mentally and practically. Yeah. You work in the community, so you go out into the community every day.
Yeah. Actually, you know, I think we are used to live in this sphere, you know. Maybe for foreigners it's new things, but we we live in it. We live in it. Really. It's not just a slogan or something. We live on fear, in fear. And I think when I go, I had to go to too many cities to work in this period, and I think most of the people are live this fear, but now live it in different level. Live it in the level of lack of medical services, a fear of young, not just the elders, also the young, because the immunity, our immunity is very also low, and there's too many levels of fears nowadays. So I can't express it more because I think fear can fear and know how to live in fear, I think, which is make us what we are, Palestinian. So it's unfair, of course. There's no hope. There's no nobody think about the future. Actually, nobody want to think about it because we don't have solutions until now. Yeah.
Ibrahim, do you feel that you're part of a Palestinian writing community, even though you're based in Jordan? Do you feel connected with other writers? Do you think there's a strong scene, even though you're all in different places?
يعني أولا اسمح لي أن يعني أضيف شيء يعني آخر عن رام الله قبل أن أنتقل إلى هذه المسألة. يعني أنا بعتقد إنه مشكلة رام الله هي حالة تراجيدية. أنا بعتقد هي عليها أن تمثل دور القدس كعاصمة، وهي أقل من القدس.
Please first let me just add something before I answer the question. I feel like Ramallah lives in a tragedy, so to speak. It has to take the role of the capital, Jerusalem, even though it's not the capital.
وعليها أن تمثل فكرة العودة الفلسطينية ولكنها أقل من العودة الفلسطينية بكثير.
It has to embody the idea of Palestinian return, even though it really represents much less than that.
وأيضا عليها أن تمثل دور الحلم الفلسطيني ولكنها جزء صغير من هذا الحلم.
Ramallah also has to represent the Palestinian dream, even though it's only a small part of the Palestinian dream.
وأعتقد هذا هو مأزق هذه المدينة منذ أوسلو حتى اليوم.
And so I think that's the dilemma that Ramallah has been living since the Oslo Accords till today.
على مستوى التواصل مع الكتابة الفلسطينية والتواصل مع الكتابة في العالم، أنا بعتقد يعني نحن اليوم محظوظون جدا بسبب وجود وسائل الاتصالات الحديثة.
As for keeping in touch with like the Palestinian writing scene and the writing scene around the world, we're very lucky these days because of modern communication technology.
هناك حركة نشر أيضا قوية جدا في العالم العربي، وهناك حركة ترجمة أنا بعتقد قوية جدا في العالم العربي، بحيث نقول أنه كل كاتب كبير في العالم ربما هو مترجم إلى اللغة العربية إلى هذا الحد أو ذاك.
There's a big publishing movement in Palestine, and there's also a big translation movement as well. And you would find that every key author around the world has probably been translated into Arabic.
يعني أنا من الناس السعيدين أن هناك أجيال جديدة فلسطينية من الكتاب والكاتبات ظهرت خلال 30 سنة الماضية أو 20 سنة الماضية، وأصبحت جزء أساسي من الكتابة الفلسطينية.
It really brings me great pleasure that there's a whole generation of new Palestinian writers who've emerged over the past 30 years and who've become like a key part of the Palestinian writing scene.
يعني اليوم نحن مع أمير ومع مايا، وهناك أكرم مسلم، وهناك عاطف أبو سيف، هناك مجموعة كبيرة من الكتاب فعلا الفلسطينيين الذين نقرأ لهم باستمتاع شديد.
Today we're with Amir and Maya, and there's Akram Sallam and Atif Abu Saif. There's a whole generation of Palestinian writers who we read with great pleasure.
وأيضا إضافة إلى ذلك هناك يعني الكتاب المكرسون مثل محمود شقير الذي نعتز به ككاتب قصة قصيرة فريد في العالم العربي، وأيضا ككاتب رواية عبر ثلاثية التي نشرها خلال السنوات العشر الماضية.
And then there's also other more established writers like Mahmoud Shaqir, who we know as a writer of short stories, but also through his recent trilogy novel, trilogy of novels more recently.
لكن أنا بعتقد كلنا ندرك أن هناك أثر كبير للأطياف المتعددة للكتابة التي تأتينا من كل أنحاء العالم اليوم، من اليابان أو من إنجلترا أو من فرنسا أو من أمريكا اللاتينية أو من الهند أو من كل هذه الدول.
I also think it's very important to acknowledge the rainbow or spectrum of great writing that comes to us from all around the world, from the UK, from France, from Japan, from India, from Latin America and other countries.
ولذلك لا نحس انه كتاب مثل ماركيز او باتريك زوسكاند او ساراماغو او سلمان رشدي هم كتاب اجانب. انا بالنسبه لي احس انهم كتاب محليين وكتاب جزء من الكتابه العربيه اليوميه، لانهم فعلا جزء من ثقافتنا اليوميه باتت وثقافه القارئ العربي.
So, you know, I don't think that great writers like Gabriel Garcia Marquez or Saramago or Susskind are writers that are foreign to people in the Arab world, because to me they are part of that culture, and we know it well.
يعني في المرحلة المدرسية حينما كنت أقرأ نجيب محفوظ مثلا، كنت أقرأ أوسكار وايلد وأقرأ إيميل زولا وأقرأ غوته وأقرأ ديكنز. كل هذه الكتب كانت جزء فعلا حتى من طفولتنا، وأنا بعتقد يعني أثرت فينا وأثرت في شخصيا تأثير كبير منذ تلك الفترة وليس اليوم.
So when I was at school, even while I was reading Egyptian writer Najib Mahfouz, I was also reading others like Oscar Wilde, Zola, Goethe, and Charles Dickens, all writers that have had an influence to me and had an influence on me and continue to influence me till today.
هناك جمال موجود في كل أنحاء العالم، وأنا بعتقد أنه أعظم ما في البشر أن نتمسك بهذا الجمال وأن نحتضن هذا الجمال من أي مكان أتى إلينا سواء أو، ولذلك نحلم بأن يكون جزء من جمالنا أن ينتقل إلى القارئ في كل مكان في هذا العالم.
I think there's beauty all around the world, and it's important for us to keep hold of that beauty and take it from wherever it comes and make the most of it.
Thank you.
Shukran. It kind of brings me on to my very last question, and we're slightly over time here, but given all of the things that you're saying, Ibrahim, and this is a question for everyone, you know, Palestine is famously one of the most educated, highly educated populations in the world. Thousands of students study at, you know, enroll in universities every year. Very, very high population percentage of the population goes to university. Given that kind of audience and that receptiveness of ordinary Palestinians to literature and to culture generally, what do you think needs to be done, or do you have any ideas for initiatives that people in the publishing industry and the rest of the world can do to kind of build better links with the West Bank and with Gaza and Palestinian and writing generally? The Arab literature and the Arab publishing world works very, very differently to the way European language publishing world works, and they're not always very well integrated. There have been some great initiatives. There's PalFest, which usually goes to Palestine every year and has a whole number of events in Palestine and takes writers there. And there's the Translation Forum, which Khaled Soleimani ran from Mutawassit publishing house. But what else can people outside of Palestine do to kind of improve links? I don't know if you want to answer this first, Maya.
Actually, I noticed something which is a little bit difficult for me, which is like all the programs, all the funding right now in NGOs and etc. It all goes to the art scene, the cinema, all the visual things, but there's a weak, very weak part going to the language. Like the language is being neglected and the literature scenes is being like depending on itself to growth. And for example, we don't have any publishing house like good one in Palestine, and this is like very like it's strange. It's very strange that we depend, and it's also understandable because we can't do marketing. We can't deliver our books outside. So all the book should be published outside Palestine in order to selling and to be seen outside. So we don't have publishing house. We don't have programs that is like fundamental programs that encourage reading, encourage book publishing, like give except very small things here or there. So, but in the other hand, you have very strong funding to the visual arts and visual scenes, and I think this is everywhere. But in Palestine, we see it very obvious because it's a small country and you can see things very clear. From my side, I'm trying to, because I believe in children, not in adults. Actually, I believe that if we were gonna do things, we have to do it with young children and young adults. So we are trying to enhance reading in schools, to make storytelling, publish books. But we also have problems with getting out these books outside, to also have a strong business, because we need to make it a business in order to live, for a long time. So I think we need like even festival like Palfest is not coming anymore. It didn't happen last year, I think, or so there is something that is not clear about literature scene. Even you have initiatives here or there and things happening outside Palestine, but not inside Palestine.
Thank you. Amir, is there anything that you think the literature scene is missing, or is there anything that you think publishers or the literature community outside of Palestine can do?
Yeah, I think we need like maybe more festivals, like as May said, like Palfest. I remember like 4 years ago or 3 years ago when I participated in Palfest, the place where we talked and where we read our text, it was actually full of people. And I think if more writers come from all the world and more funding for similar festivals can actually can be helpful, I think, because I guess people in Palestine and there's a lot of people that are, want to hear more about literature, want to have more connections. So I think more funding to that will be so helpful.
Thank you. And Ibrahim, do you have any thoughts about what's missing or what's needed?
يعني أنا بعتقد مع إنه يعني نحن ندرك في فلسطين وفي العالم العربي بشكل أساسي أهمية الثقافة، وخاصة في الحالة الفلسطينية، لأنه إذا ما تذكرنا مثلا أنه جولدا مائير الزعيمة الصهيونية كانت تقول لو كان الفلسطينيون شعب لكان لهم أدب، لكن طبعا الآن لا تستطيع أن تقول هذا الكلام لأنه أدبنا موجود في كل مكان، لكن رغم ذلك ليس هناك التفات حقيقي إلى قوة الأدب وأهمية الأدب.
Even though as Palestinians and Arabs we are very, very recognizing of the importance of culture and literature, and I'm reminded of the Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir's statement saying if Palestinians were actually a people, then they would have literature. And well, a statement like that would just not stand today because we have a very, very defined literature scene and output.
إذا أتينا إلى العالم العربي فالمسألة يعني أيضا لا تقل تعقيدا عن هذه المسألة في هذا المجال، لأنه هناك أنظمة لا تحب المثقفين ولا تحب الثقافة أصلا، لأنها أنظمة ديكتاتورية وبالتالي لا يمكن أن تكون داعمة للثقافة والمثقفين بشكل فعلي.
And then looking at more widely at the Arab scene, we find there are regimes that don't like intellectuals and don't like the cultural scene because of the challenge that they pose to them.
ثم في السنوات الأخيرة أصبح هناك ترهيب للمؤسسات المستقلة إذا ما فكرت بدعم الثقافة، لأنه أيضا في العالم أو في بعض الدول العالم مثل أمريكا بدأت هناك تهمة الإرهاب يمكن أن تلحق بأي مؤسسة تدعم كتابا عن فلسطين مثلا.
And then more recently we see terrorizing and intimidation of independent institutions that are supportive of Palestinian and Arab literature. And like, for example, even publishing a book about Palestine might land an organization with a terrorism charge.
ولذلك ليس غريبا إذا ما ضربت مثال برواية لي هي رواية زمن الخيول البيضاء التي تم تحويلها إلى مسلسل. خلال 10 سنوات مع وجود مخرج عظيم كان مستعد إخراجها ومنتج مهم، إلا أننا لم نستطع الوصول إلى فضائية عربية واحدة مستعدة أن تعرض هذا المسلسل لأنه عن فلسطين إذا ما تم إنتاجه.
And if I were to speak of an example that relates to me, one of my novels, The Age of the White Horses, which was serialized to be with the intention of producing it as a series, but over the course of 10 years, we couldn't find a producer for this in any of the Arab television and broadcasting stations because of the connection to Palestine.
فالوضع كله فيما يتعلق بفلسطين أنا بعتقد هو وضع محزن، ولذلك على الكاتب الفلسطيني أن يبذل أضعاف الجهد الذي يمكن أن يبذله أي كاتب في هذا العالم حتى يصل كتابه.
So I find that the situation in relation to Palestine is really saddening, and Palestinian writers have to exert much more effort than their counterparts elsewhere for their message and output to reach audience.
وإذا ما تذكرنا أنه دائما يعني المثقفين المركزيين في الثقافة هم ليسوا أبناء السلطات وليسوا أبناء التنظيمات وليسوا أبناء المؤسسات الكبرى، فأنا بعتقد هم أبناء أنفسهم. إذا ما تذكرنا ذلك سنكتشف كم هو الوضع فعلا صعب الذي تواجهه الثقافة الفلسطينية بشكل خاص.
So if we remember that the pivotal writers and intellectuals in Palestine are not those that come from families in authority and in like high status, but rather they're people who have made themselves and are independent, then realize how much more difficult the situation is.
لكن على مستوى آخر يعني أنا بعتقد أنه النشر العربي جيد. هناك كتاب فلسطينيون مؤثرون جدا في الثقافة العربية، وهناك أيضا أصدقاء لنا في كل أنحاء العالم يعملون ما استطاعوا فعلا ليس دعم الثقافة بوصفها كتابة فقط، ولكن بدعم الثقافة بوصفها عدالة وجمال وحرية.
And then looking at another Arab level, I find that there are Arab writers who are supportive of Palestinian writing and publicizing it and describing writing not just as literature but as a voice of justice and publicizing the Palestinian plight. Thank you.
I guess it's thank you ever so much to our three guests and to Mohammed for today. We've sadly run out of time. I can't commend the Book of Ramallah highly enough. It's a fantastic glimpse, and we've only seen a glimpse of what a city, what a wonderful city Ramallah is. It's one of the few books that Com has done as part of this Reading the City series that covers a city that I've actually been to, and it was an extraordinary experience. and one that I think the book captures a little bit of. So sadly we've run out of time, so it just remains for me to say, please buy the book. There's a link to the book under the YouTube channel, and please join us in thanking Amir Hamid, Mayor Abu Al-Hayat, Ibrahim Nasrallah, and Mohammed Galini for today. Thank you.
Shukran. Thank you.
And tune in for the festival in full, which runs from the Friday the 16th to Sunday the 25th of July. I'll see you then at the Liverpool Arab Arts Festival then.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.